I was 15 years old when I started watching lots of movies. And I mean lots and lots and lots of movies. And I did this because I watched lots of television, broadcast television. Not cable or streaming today, but broadcast television. Now, there are a lot of circumstances that all came together that allowed me to do that, beginning with my family. I came from a family of 6 kids, 5 siblings and 2 parents, of course. Now that might sound shocking today. It sounds shocking to me today. But my best friend, as a matter of fact, in that time, also came from a family of 6 kids. So it wasn't that big a deal to us. It really wasn't. So anyone who's come from a big family knows that you spend a lot of time together as a family. There's the 6 of you plus the parents, whether it's meals, vacations, whatever. And if you're of a certain kind of personality like I was, you really want to have that away from the kids and parents time to be on your own. And that was definitely me. I was a loner and I wanted to be on my own. So what helped me to do this was we had 2 televisions in our house at the time. We had one in the main floor and we had one in the basement. And so the basement became my refuge. I would watch television, this broadcast television, by myself for years. Now, I was a product of my generation, pretty much the same as everybody else in a small community. I was outside a lot. I played a lot of sports. In the summertime or weekends, I would be outside doing whatever it is we kids did. My mother said she never had any idea where I was until I showed up for food and then disappeared again. So I'd be out all day, and then by nightfall I'd be back home. After school, same thing, and then as the sun went down, I'd be back home. So I was good in school, which meant that I could put the homework aside pretty fast. I'd do my homework and put it aside, so that wasn't a burden. So I had lots of evening hours, lots, to do whatever I wanted. And what I wanted to do, for whatever reason, was watch television. I was on my own in the basement. I don't know why my other siblings weren't interested in being down there instead of being on the main floor, or didn't want to watch as much TV, but I watched television like a maniac. So in the mid-60s, 10 years old or so, started watching a lot of TV until I was 15, when things kind of changed. Now, 10 years before that, the movies and television, they were in a bit of a war, commercial war, not a real war. The movies had been the dominant mode of entertainment for 30 years. They had survived the war of the 1920s between radio and them, which I'll talk about when I talk about the silent era, when people started listening to actors and listening to things and they wanted their movies to be sound. But the movies survived the radio threat. 30 years later, the television threat appeared. Television appeared in the late 40s, but really started to pick up steam in the early mid-50s. And the movies were afraid of 2 things. One, they were afraid of losing their position as the dominant force. And of course, that meant losing ticket sales. In other words, the bottom line was what they were worried about. So they did some good things. They increased the size of the screens. They added more color to the films. They did some gimmicky things like smells in the theater and seats that shook if there was an earthquake on screen, things like that. But by the end of the 50s, the war was over. The movies had survived and they were going to thrive for the next 20 years. They would be very different in the 60s and 70s than what they were in the 50s, and that's for another chat. The television was exploding by the late 50s, really exploding, but I think it would become exponentially bigger in the 60s because of one thing. There was a certain amount of sports on television in the 50s, but the 60s would see an explosion of sports on television, and that really changed things. So by the late 60s, I watched all the programs on TV, and there were lots of programs. I won't go into them. I know you've heard them all, maybe. People like to talk about the Beverly Hillbillies and Green Acres and Andy of Mayberry and Leave It to Beaver and all. I watched all those shows and more. And but there was a funny thing that happened in this time. Television was full of movies, just full of movies. The big show of the week, the Sunday night movie of the week, the Thursday night movie of the week, Saturday night at the movies, movies for a Saturday afternoon, movies for a Sunday afternoon, movies for a Tuesday afternoon. They didn't have afternoon talk shows in those days. All the important programs were in the prime hours of 7:30 to 11 o'clock. So they had a lot of time to fill, and movies were still very, very popular. So they programmed movies, and they pumped these movies, and so there was an opportunity to watch them. So there I am down in the basement, homework done, on my own, and watching television. And after a while, a movie would be on screen, so I'd watch the movie. Now, I don't remember too much about any of the movies I saw prior to 1971. I saw a lot of them, I know, and I saw a lot of programs. I saw one film before I was 10 years old, I think, one film. And that film was The Wizard of Oz. I've seen it once, and I never want to see it again. That witch scared me, and those monkeys scared me, and I just had a bad vibe the whole time I was watching it. And I've tried to watch it again, but I just can't. I love Judy Garland. I love Somewhere Over the Rainbow. I know all the cultural references to the film, but no thank you. I don't want to watch it ever again. So that was it. Then I started watching television, started watching movies on television, of which, as I said, there were an enormous number, but only on television. I never went to the theater. In our town, there was no theater at the time. There was a theater in a close by town. So the only movie I saw during this time period was Help in a theater, 1965-ish, 66. I saw Help in the theater. The Beatles, it starred the Beatles, and I was like hundreds of millions of people, an enormous Beatles fan in those days. Yes, I did see the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show on February 8th or 9th, 1964. I did watch that. So that was it. Otherwise, my introduction to movies was on television. So I don't have a whole lot of recollection of anything. I watched them religiously. I had a best friend who I never watched movies with him, but we always would talk about the movies afterwards and talk about television. So that was a really good thing too. I could talk about what I saw. We talked about what we watched the night before or 2 nights before. And I discovered that right through my whole life, that's a really good thing. See something, talk about it. See something, talk about it. That really helped. So that was also a bonus. So by 1971, I was 15 years old, typical kid. I played a lot of sports. I must have had my teenage hormones, but I was a very late bloomer, I have to admit. So as a heterosexual, the female of the species was of interest to me, but I didn't have a girlfriend and didn't hang out with girls very much. I played, as I said, I played sports with my best friend. We played chess after school. Get this, we played bridge on Friday and Saturday nights, a really dynamic lifestyle in those days. But I was aware of them. And I realized that the movies I was watching, I couldn't relate to anybody. The movies were not first-run films, of course, because it was broadcast television, unlike today. If a movie was made in 1965, it might be 10 years before it got on screen. So the movies that you watch were 5, 10, 15, 20 years old. The television programs were of people your age, so I could relate to the kids in those shows and maybe the adults, but anybody older than high school looked weird to me. And certainly in the movies with different hairstyles, different clothing, they all looked strange. They didn't look interesting at all. They didn't look inspiring. They were just from another planet. The teenage girls and the women of those films were very, very unreachable for me. So that was fine. I was watching. And then one day in 1971, and I guess it must have been hyped, there must have been a lot of advertising because they always hype the movies. This Sunday we will be showing, or this Thursday night at the movies we will have, or something. So I guess it was hyped. And so I watched this film. Now the film was, it was about a photographer who had been injured taking a photograph. He was this grizzled, tough guy photographer who went to war zones and jungles and exotic places and also racetracks. And in this movie, he had broken his leg getting the shot for a racing scene. So he was in a 2-room apartment, and in a chair or a bed, and he had almost a body cast for his broken leg. I guess in those days the cast was about from here all the way down to his toes. So he was chair-ridden or bed-ridden for about 6 weeks, and the movie begins when he's almost finished his time in the bed and the chair. And he also has an insurance paid physiotherapist who comes by every day and does whatever she does, maybe makes some meals and massages and things. And that was played by a well-known actress at the time, and that provided good comic relief. And also the opening part of the movie was allowed to sort of set the scene for what was going to happen in the movie. I didn't know anything about the plot. I must have seen a promo for it. I knew who the main character was, the actor. He had been famous since the late 30s. But I didn't know anything about the film. And I didn't know who the leading lady was. So he's in this chair, and now he lives in a 2-room apartment that he's in a quadrangle. So there's apartments on either side of his window and apartments across from his window. And the quadrangle also has a courtyard. So by sitting in this chair for 6 weeks, he looks out of his window, and he sees the world and life going on. And in the first few minutes, we see everybody: the musician on the top floor across the way, the married couple on the side, the arguing couple a couple of floors down, the wannabe actress dancer below the musician, the single lady on the main floor who's kind of a sad figure, another lady who's kind of noisy and has a dog and sticks her nose in everybody's business. So it was nice. It was a nice little group of different kinds of people, so you can see the cinematic value to how this was set up. So okay, this is good. We start off and it's looking interesting. The physiotherapist is talking about his girlfriend, who is going to appear soon, and how it's such a perfect match, and yet he's not so sure. He's the grizzled photographer, career guy, travel the world. She is a society woman in the fashion industry, from a very different part of the world than he is. So how they got together, how they met, I don't know. Maybe he was taking fashion photographs or cover photographs. I think that might have been a suggestion at the beginning of the film. But anyhow, they met and they were a couple. And the physiotherapist says that she's crazy mad in love with him, and he's, I don't know, and all that, and I gotta get up and go, and I can't stay at home. So that's sort of a dynamic that's introduced at the beginning. So she's coming over for dinner. So he looks out the window and watches the crowd, and he sees things, and nothing much is happening. There's a lot of comedic situations, and it's very interesting. And then he dozes off. So he's sitting in the chair and he dozes off, and the camera fades out and fades back in again, and he's still sitting in the chair with his eyes closed, and the camera's fairly close on his face. But we hear the door open, so we just assume that the girlfriend has arrived. And the camera's still on his face, but the next 5 to 10 seconds of cinema changed my movie going for the rest of my life. It was a watershed moment. It was a turning point. It was a benchmark, whatever you want to call it. It was, to this day, my hair stands on end in the back of my neck. I get goosebumps. As we're looking at his face, the camera cuts to hers, and it's an extreme close-up of this woman's face, about here to here. And I don't know why, but to me, she was the most gorgeous woman I had ever seen in my life, on screen or in person. She was stunningly beautiful. I mean, Helen of Troy reborn, if anybody knows who Helen of Troy was. And it was just a magic cinematic moment, because he held the scene held her face for a couple of seconds. Then it cut to a profile where he wakes up and doesn't move his head, but he's awake and she's awake. And in slow motion, the film's in slow motion, she leans in and they have this incredibly erotic, seductive kiss that lasts maybe, even in slow motion, maybe 2 seconds. So that 8 seconds, let's say 5, 7, 8, 10 seconds, I don't even think it was 10 seconds long, changed everything for me about the movies. I realized that movies could affect you this way. The use of the camera, the use of the slow motion, the fact that stars were, of course, larger than life. They always had been larger than life. But this one was unbelievable. Now, this movie was released in 1954. The woman was very famous. Even in 1954, she was considered a spectacularly beautiful and very talented actress. And so that was nothing new. For some reason, I'm pretty sure I had missed her entirely in my movie watching in the late 60s, but not anymore. And it was revelatory. It was unbelievable. The actress's name was Grace Kelly, and the movie was called Rear Window. The male lead was James Stewart. And the movie was directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Now after seeing this 5 or 10 seconds, I was completely absorbed in this movie. Everything about it. It was funny, sad, and most importantly, I think it was a mystery. And I guess by that time, whether through TV or something, I liked mysteries. I really liked mystery movies. And this one was a good one. It's an understatement. I was absolutely immersed in this film for the entire film, for the rest of it. She remained utterly gorgeous. The story went on, and it was just, for me, it was just the most fabulous movie experience I had had up to that time. Now, here's a funny aside. The movie was called Rear Window, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Now, Hitchcock had started making movies in the late 20s, silent films. He's British, English guy. And very quickly, by the middle 30s, he had got quite a reputation for being a very accomplished director. His movies did well. Even today, people talk about his movies from the 30s, what they like about them, and many people enjoy them. I saw a movie he made in the 30s called The 39 Steps. I saw it a little while ago, and it stands up very well, and it's funny, and it really does well. But I think he really reached his peak. He was at the height of his talents and power in the 50s, and he made a bunch of terrific films, and I'll talk about some of them as we go along. But Rear Window was spectacular, and one that has always stood out for me. Now, Hitchcock was also very much in control of what he made, so the copyrights to these films were strictly controlled such that none of the films saw the light of day after their initial release. These let's say 5 films from the late 40s to the early 60s, or 6 films, they were all just locked away and didn't see the light of day for years and years and years, until the middle late 80s, when they, for whatever negotiations or money changing hands, they were re-released. And I remember watching a bunch of them in the theaters, and it was, of course, spectacular. But they were not released for 30 years. And I thought, wait a minute, am I dreaming? I know I saw this movie on television. I know I did. It was this moment that I've been telling you about. And I thought, am I dreaming? Did I not see it? Did I not see it for another 20 years? And then just a few days ago, looking at a website that has an infinite amount of information on every movie ever made, it said that, talked about the copyrights and the restrictive use of the films, but it said in 1971, the American Broadcasting Corporation, ABC, and just so you know, there were only 3 networks in the US at the time, ABC, CBS, and NBC, and because there were only 3, of course, they were incredibly powerful. Lots of money, and then lots of control over what they did and how they did it. And what happened was, in 1971, ABC, they said, the article said, did air Rear Window without permission. Somebody probably said, we really like this movie, it's going to attract a huge audience, let's just do it. And they did it. Now, were they sued or were they happened? It didn't say, and who knows, but it proved that I did in fact see it when I was 15 years old in 1971. And that was very cool, I have to tell you, very cool. So after this, I wanted to watch more movies. I wanted to get to know who these people were. What else had Alfred Hitchcock done? What else can I see? Grace Kelly only did a few more films. I don't know if you know her story, but she actually ended up marrying a prince and living a fabulous life and leaving the Hollywood scene pretty quickly after a couple of more films. Watched more movies. Then I was very fortunate that my best friend, I mentioned, he ended up being the assistant manager in the cinema that was finally built in my hometown. And within about a year or so, I was able to get a job there. So what that meant was more exposure, more films. Now, first-run films, not a lot of new ones, not old ones, but just exposure. So that was a good thing. The only downside to that, but I actually got a real kick out of it, was in the summer in those days, if a movie was good, it would stay in the theater. And the reason why was that the longer a movie played in the theater, the more revenue went to the theater and not the owners of the film. So the first couple of weeks, an overwhelming percentage, I've read somewhere it could be as high as 80% of any revenue the movie got went right back to whoever made the film. So for the movie to go longer meant that dropped off and more money would go to the theater. So the summer that before I went to school, I went to university and I was in that theater, there were 2 films that were played all summer long. They never left June, July, August. And one of those films was American Graffiti, made in I think 1972-ish, and The Three Musketeers, made around the same time. Now both of them are fabulous films, but I think I saw American Graffiti 60 times. Enough said. So my movie road continued. I went to university. After a stumble of thinking maybe I was going to do math, physics, and chemistry, which did not satisfy my creative side, I switched to a major in English literature. At the same time that year, University of Toronto had started a cinema studies program, so I was in the first year of that program, which was a film minor, which meant you had to take 6 courses, and you said, okay, you have achieved a film minor in cinema studies. So once again, that expanded my horizons for seeing films. So I had tremendous profs in those courses. I had 3 that I had more than once, and they were just fabulous men who knew their stuff and loved movies and were just great teachers. So I was very fortunate about that. And so that, again, expanded my horizons. I saw more films, silent films, foreign films. It was really terrific. The next benchmark in my movie journey was 1977, I think, when technology stepped in. Now picture 1975, 1976. If you wanted to watch a movie, but it wasn't being shown in the theaters, you probably couldn't see it. If you wanted to watch a movie and it wasn't on television, you probably couldn't see it. Now there were repertory theaters in the city, and those were small theaters that somehow got their hands on prints of old films, and they would show it for one night, and then the next night they'd have a completely different film. So they didn't have an inexhaustible supply, but they did have old films. But if they weren't playing the movie you wanted to see, you didn't see it. Now think of me as an English major. If I wanted to read a book that was written in the 19th century, 18th century, 17th century, a play from the 16th century, I could go to the library or a bookstore, and if it was popular enough, famous enough, I could find it. I could find any book, any play by Shakespeare, any book by Dickens. They were all published, all available, but not movies. So for the student of films, or for the people who wanted to learn as much about movies as they can, that was not a great time period, or it hadn't been a great time period for decades. But then in 1977, the Japanese invented the videotape cassette. Now, as a little backtrack, television was always, when they saved programs on television, and they didn't always save them, they were just shown and gone, they had these 1 to 2 inch tapes, and an analog, and for those of you who don't know that, I don't know it either, but the tapes would capture the images from the television shows. Now, you would need massive machines to play these tapes, so it was just an industry thing. But then the Japanese invented a portable tape, about the size of this notebook, and a little thicker. It was a 1/2 inch cassette that you would put into a video recorder, VCR, video cassette recorder, we call VCR, and you could play whatever was on that tape, sound and picture. So what happened was, after about a year, that appeared in North America. And what happened was, all these movies, or many movies, over the course of the next 3 or 4 years, all got, through some technology that I'm not aware of, got transferred onto tapes. And then these tapes you could rent or buy, and it absolutely exploded. So that after a few years, because it took time to transfer the movies onto these tapes, so to build up the libraries, after a few years, it was the first golden moment for the movie fan, because you could watch almost any movie you wanted to see. Now, not all of them, because there were always obscure silent films or maybe foreign films where they didn't have them transferred over fast enough. But Gone were the days that if it wasn't being broadcast, you couldn't see it. You could see these films. So my movie watching just went through the roof. For however many I'd seen up to that point, and I'd seen a lot of films up to that point, it just went crazy. Everybody had a VCR. Everybody could rent or buy the tapes. There were stores, and I'll mention a store, and you probably, for those of you who don't know, most of you will know, it was called Blockbuster, and it was everywhere, and it was probably, if there weren't billion-dollar companies in those days, I'm sure it was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, because every town had numerous Blockbusters. Even a small town would have at least one, and you'd go and you'd rent the movie, and you'd play the movie, and you'd bring back the tape, and even though a lot of what they did was current films, there were still places where you could get older films. So it was just wonderful, absolutely wonderful for the moviegoer, movie fan. So then and that lasted for 20 years. It became the dominant form. Now, I don't think did it surpass people watching movies in the theaters? It might have, because, you know, watching it in your own home, the TVs were not enormous like they are today. They were, you know, the biggest ones might have been 32-inch screens or something. So it still wasn't the same as a movie experience, but it sure as hell was convenient. So 20 years later, the technology advanced again to become digital. So the digital video disc, which DVD is what we called them, of course, what everybody called them, and that did two things. The resolution of the image was exponentially better. Now, the VHS tapes, the resolution was okay. It ranged from not too bad to not so good, but DVDs, the resolution was exceptional. So all the movies, of course, shot on 35 millimeter or more film. The original prints were the resolution, unless they were damaged, was spectacular. So then the DVD came in and took over. So once again, all these movies had to be scanned through some technology and transferred onto DVD. And so the DVD became the reigning force. And yes, there's Blu-ray and there was other iterations, but they were all thin, easy to store. You could put double the number of DVDs in a store if you wanted to open a store and rent or sell. And that was the second golden moment where movie fans had no excuse now. If you wanted to watch a film, any film, you could probably find it. And it was a wonderful time. And of course, my viewing, once again, went through the roof, and it was like I was getting up over 3,000, over 4,000 movies I'd seen. And of course, not a whole lot, more than one and less than 100 I would see again and again and again, because I have my favorites. And one of the things that we'll talk about are my favorites and why they are my favorites. And that lasted, oddly enough, the same as the VHS. It lasted about 20 years. Then in 2017, something happened. The internet exploded. Now, the internet had been around since the late 90s, you know, email and things, but the internet, the power, the bandwidth, all those things got increased, and streaming became a reality. So in 2015, 85% of home entertainment was via DVD. By 2018, 80% of home entertainment was streaming media. Now, I don't want to get into too much about what's happening today. This is not the focus of what I'm talking about, except to say that with all the various platforms, it just isn't as easy to see movies as when you could see them when there were DVDs and VHS, because you could just go into a store and get whatever movie you wanted. Now the subscriptions, and are you subscribed to this, are you on this, are you on that, makes your head spin. So, okay. So the golden moment was over for the movie fan. So that's why my focus of these chats is from the talking period primarily. I will do silent pantomime cinema a different time, but the talking period from the early 30s till about the year 2000, the movies that I really like and want to talk about. So that was my journey all the way up till the present, and all the movies I've seen, and my love for films, and how it really shaped my life, why this loner in the basement, just could so focus on these films and get into these movies so much. It was wonderful. It was just a wonderful experience. So I thought, what about today? What if that 15-year-old was today? Now, when I was 15 years old, let's say, give or take a bit, there were 35 years of movies that had been produced. Now, again, we're talking about the talking era, the modern era, not the silent era. So 35 years, that's not nothing, but that isn't a number that I think that is daunting to me. If that 15-year-old was starting today, or a university student, or anybody, even someone like me, wanting to know more about films and seeing movies other than current releases, There are now 90 years of films that have been produced. 90 years. Now that's a number that makes my head spin too. So you might say, well, wait a minute, you studied English literature and there was 600 years of English literature. And that's true. We start at around 1300, and there's an author that we would study, and then there's a little bit later there's another one. And it wasn't, now there may have been 200,000 books or plays or poems written every year, but the ones that have survived and that we study, they're a lot fewer than that. So it's quite easy to do a survey course of English literature from the 1300s to, let's say, 1950 or 1960, and not be completely overwhelmed by the volume. Now there's, of course, no shortage of novels, no shortage of plays and poetry and stuff, but it was, I think, manageable. But for movies, where do you begin? I was very lucky. I'll tell you, earlier this summer, the University of Toronto Cinema Studies had their 50th anniversary. Of course, I started in 1975. You do the math, and that's approximately 50 years ago. They had an anniversary, so I got an invite, or I was connected to Innis College at U of T in a couple of ways. And I went to this reunion. The best thing about that day was I ran into one of my professors from 1975. This wonderful fellow is still alive and kicking. And I was so happy to at least see what I was hoping to see, all of them, hoping they were still alive and well. But this fellow showed up. His name's, well, I won't tell you his name, but he was my first prof. And he was gracious enough to agree to meet me for lunch on another occasion after this reunion. And we talked, of course, what's better for movie fans than talking about movies? I mean, you meet a movie fan, and the two of you can talk about movies forever. It's just a wonderful byproduct of being a fan of films. So we talked about films, and I said to him, you had your whole career as a cinema teacher. Would you start like I did with English literature, as a survey course is the first course you take, and then you start to get into the details of the literature? And he said they did it a little different. He said what they did in their first course was they jumped right into a film, a good representative film that they deemed to be of value, that they thought was a good example of movie making. And again, this would have been between the period of the 30s, from the 30s to the 90s, let's say. And they would go right in and talk about that film in a great detail, in the detail that the cinema students would come to expect from several courses in cinema studies. And then after that, the next course they would take would be a survey course, and starting with silent cinema, the pantomime cinema, all the way up to the present. So I thought, well, that made a whole lot of sense. So that's why I want to address the films I really like slowly, one at a time, but I was quite comfortable in addressing the 1971 broadcast of Rear Window and what that effect it had on me, and introduce you to James Stewart, Grace Kelly, the director Alfred, Hitchcock, the character actor Thelma Ritter was in that movie, another actor who became very famous after this movie, a Canadian actor actually by the name of Raymond Burr, who ended up being a very famous lawyer in the 60s called Ironside. And that's a movie I like very, very much. And if you are interested in mystery films and want to get a good example of what the filming of the 50s was like, I heartily recommend this film. So, still that being said, you're the 15-year-old or the university person or anybody at this time, and you want to learn more about movies. And I've had conversations with many young people who say, yeah, I watch current films and I haven't seen too many old films like the ones before 2010. Those are what are known as old films. But I want to. And I thought, well, yes, how do you start? How do you dive in? Yes, you've got Google. Yes, you've got AI. Yes, you can just on your own say, tell me what I should watch. And and I suppose that's possible, but they now, I think, there are other avenues. And one of those avenues is University of Toronto Cinema Studies program has grown, surprise, surprise, from when I went, and now has a full degree in cinema studies. So you can get a major in cinema studies. You can also get postgraduate degrees in cinema studies. So that's a very good thing. And of course there are influencers and critics by the hundreds of thousands out there. But you can also choose, if you so care to be guided by that fellow from the 22nd row.